As Blake gazed into the luminous crystal, the electric lights in the apartment began to flicker.
Hello, I am the Epidemic. Today we will be learning how to play Mythos, the card game. Mythos, as you guys know, or don't, started around 1996, ran till 1997, 1998, when Chaosium collapsed and the new Aeon set was cut short. But that's neither here nor there. Today we will just be doing a tutorial because on a very, very rare occasion, people find their way into the game and want to know how to play. Or in some cases, people never quite got a good handle on how to play the game because it is more complex than maybe it should be. I don't know. I'm not here to judge the game. I'm just here to teach you how to play it. So, to that end, the players, however many you have, I would suggest at least 2. But you can have as many players as you want. Some people have devised solo rules so that they could play with themselves. You know, if you want to play with yourself, you go right ahead. But I will be talking to you in the assumption that you are playing a sentient other player. So, you will be one investigator of various shapes and sizes. There's a lot of investigators that you can choose from. There are at least 9 in the original set, the limited edition. You can, no, I lied. There's 18 because there's 9 cards. There are an additional 5 that pop up from the Dreamlands expansion and 5 more in the new Aeon expansion. So in any case, oh, and 2 more in the limited edition. So 10, 12 plus 9 is 21 times 2. You technically have 42 choices. Do the math. We'll figure it out. So anyway, you are an investigator, and your job is to complete adventures. The game ends when a player runs out of sanity. Doesn't matter who. Once that happens, you tally up your scores, and your scores are generated by however many adventure points you have completed, plus however much remaining sanity you have. So just for the sake of example, let's say I managed to complete an adventure, and apparently there's no adventures in this deck. That's crazy. The adventure, Stand Against the Order. It's a 9-point adventure. So I score that. But immediately, the turn thereafter, the opposing player does enough damage to me in, we'll say, a combat phase, or through the use of spells, or even debilitating phobias, to cause me to hit 0 sanity, right? Then, we tally up the scores. I get 9 adventure points, because this is a 9-point adventure. 0 points for sanity, so my final score is 9. The opponent, even though he may have defeated me, he has to add up his adventure points. Let's pretend he has an adventure and it's a 6-point adventure. And then let's say he has 3 sanity. So apparently it was a rough fight for both players. So his 6 points plus 3 points of sanity winds up being, well, that's 9 points. Damn. So it's a tie. But you get the idea. Whoever has the higher score at the end of the day does in fact win. So, how do you play the game? The first thing you need is a deck of cards, right? In that deck, you must have at least 20 points worth of adventures. For the case of this particular deck, as you saw earlier, I have Stand Against the Order, which is a 9-point adventure, and a daring 12-point adventure called Assault on Yal Nethay. and you guys can go ahead and figure out how to pronounce that if any of you have the card, because it's one of those Lovecraftian Cthulhu-ish languages, so you'll hear about 20 different ways to pronounce it. So that's a 12-point adventure plus a 9-point adventure. That's 21 points. Now, do I recommend you have a deck with just 2 adventures? That's your call. We'll get into deck tech in another video, which is actually one I'm really looking forward to. I'm making this video, though, because it makes more sense to show people how to play than get into the nuance over just going straight for the most fun parts but not having a foundation. So, 52, and the deck must be at least 52 cards. So, it has to have 21 points worth of adventure, 52 cards or more. There's no upper limit, although if anybody has played card games, you understand that the larger your deck, the less likely things are going to happen because the odds of drawing certain cards become more and more difficult. So to that end, try to stay. I would say start with, if you can make a deck of 60 cards or less, do it. And then as you play more and more, try to shrink it to the minimum of 52, because it really maximizes your ability to just get the cards you want. Because there's nothing worse than drawing a brand new hand for a round and you have an adventure you're trying to complete, and guess what? The one card you're looking for isn't in there. It's terrible. So, the other caveat to the adventures is you must be able to physically complete the adventure with the cards in your deck. So, the way you complete an adventure is by, when you look at the adventure, depending on the age of the card, it will either have it tells you a story, and it will either have a boldface, italicized, not italicized. There will be words that stand out, okay? Such as, for example, stand with the order. You and two steadfast allies are at first greatly impressed by the strange magnetic charisma of Barnabas Marsh, Jeremiah Brewster, and Robert Marsh. But in parentheses it says, hey, you need 2 of the 3, not all 3. So we're already at 2 allies and 3 other cards that need to be in this deck, right? Just to be able to complete it. Anyway, so moving on. Leaders of the order. You soon notice evidence of the Innsmouth look among their followers. A stealthy investigation of the Marsh Mansion and the Marsh Refinery reveals convincing evidence of the terrible customs and foul plot for humankind. In a desperate attempt to rid the world of this menace, you dynamite the Esoteric Order of Dagon. So, 2 allies, 3 named people, which, by the way, they're all unique. So you can only... they may not all be unique. I think they're all unique. If they're unique, you can only have 1 of each copy in the deck. So that's not the easiest thing to work out. But you do only need 2 of the 3 to successfully complete the adventure. You need the Innsmouth Look, which is an event card. It's a good event card, actually. The Marsh Mansion, which is a location. The Marsh Refinery, which is a location. The Esoteric Order of Dagon, which is also a location, none of which are unique, so you can have multiple copies of them. And Dynamite, which is a great card. So, I need all those cards if I'm going to play this adventure. So, you got to get the adventure. You got to find the cards that you need, right? They make up the backbone of the deck. And you have to do that with all the 20 points. And then whatever's left over, you can either add more copies of the cards you want, or add more cards that don't have to be listed on any of the adventures, just to be able to play. So anyway, we'll assume you have a functioning deck moving forward. So, if you look at your adventurer, investigator, what have you, it tells you their name, which is not particularly important, but it does tell you about their languages they speak, which can help when it comes to tomes. It tells you their education, which only helps determine who goes first during certain situations at the beginning of rounds. Their beginning sanity, that's your life, basically. The maximum sanity you can have, because you will fluctuate, but there is a cap to how sane you can be. The hand size, which is usually going to be 13 cards. That's just the standard. 13 is a very common motif for this game, so you'll see a lot of 13 stuff. There's even a 13 phobia. Trisco whatever phobia. And it'll also tell you what your minimum and maximum hand size can be. So, the adventure card also gives you a general layout of how you want your cards to look so that everybody can understand what's going on in your particular game. So, assuming you've drawn your cards, and I guess we'll just stick with this particular deck to keep life simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So of your 13 cards you draw, you and your opponents will then take turns until you either choose not to have any more turns for the round, or until you are unable to have any more turns for the round. So, for example, turn 1, you can play a location. That's generally the first thing you have to do in most cases, but you're considered to be outside during the daytime at the start of the game. So most people will play a location as their very first play, but you can play an event, assuming that your situation allows for it. You can't play things like tomes or monsters, just because the chances of you being able to find a tome or an artifact or a monster just outside during the day without being at a location is extremely low. I'm not even sure it's doable, just to be honest. So what you'll do is you will play a card, and that's your turn. Then it's the next player's turn. They will play a card. That's their turn. Then it's your turn again, or whatever. We'll just assume it's 2 players. Then you play a card. That's your turn. So it's very, very simple in that I go, you go. I go, you go. There are a few cards that can be played out of turn, such as Yithian Mental Contact, which is the counter spell of the game. And I believe Nick of Time can be played out of turn. There may be 1 or 2 more. I'm very good at understanding the library of the Cthulhu mythos, at least as far as this game is concerned, because I own most of it. But I don't remember everything of every card at every time. So, to get into how do you play beyond this particular overview, we will go ahead and look at the 8 different types of cards, not including the Adventurer since we already talked about it, and move on from there.
I remember Yuggoth, and more distant Shagai, in the ultimate void of the Black Planets.
Okay, so one thing we can try is to have you pretend that you and I are playing each other. So if you do happen to have a deck ready to go, why don't you go ahead and get it shuffled up, get it ready, draw 13 cards, set up your investigator, kind of like a Bob Ross style, paint your own happy trees along with me kind of situation. So anyway, whether you do that or not, you go right ahead. You're probably crazy if you do. So, you've got your Mythos deck. That is your 52 plus cards. I drew an opening hand of 13 as per my adventurer. As I said, this is the Proud Prussian Submariner. And yes, there's a submarine in this deck, because what's a submariner without a submarine? He has a total of 15 sanity at the start, since I don't have 15-sided dice, and I prefer just larger print. Matter of fact, let's not make a liar out of me. Since I prefer larger print, I just use 12-siders or 10s just to get nice big numbers. So 15 sanity. This is not necessarily where they go. They can go anywhere you want as long as everybody can see what's going on. So I'm going to play and teach at the same time. I have cheated and drawn a perfect hand for the purposes of a tutorial. So there you go. In my perfect hand, I happen to have a Shoggoth, Stand Against the Order, which is an adventure, the Innsmouth Look, Taco Bellevue Hospital in New York, Raymond LaGrasse, Captain Karl Heinrich, Wave of Oblivion, which is a spell, the Cathat Aquadingen, which is the best name for a tome ever, Dynamite, the Marsh Refining Company, Smuggler's Tunnels from the New Aeon, if you guys aren't familiar, Abigail Winthrop Marsh, and the Sphere of Nath. Okay? So, turn 1, round 1, who goes first? Whoever has the lowest sanity. Since my sanity is 15, we look at the other player. If he also has 15, then the education is what comes in. Whoever has the highest education goes first. Prussian Submariner, 8. It's pretty low. Many scholarly characters will be able to go first. But that only applies, like I said, if you have matching sanity. If you have, like, the Tragic Waif, or Homeless Waif, or whatever, I think she starts with something really low, like 8 sanity or something ridiculous. So, anyway, lower sanity goes first, always. So, let's pretend I get to go first, just for the sake of discussion. I cannot... what can you play? Well, you can play any valid card. Valid cards, for example, a valid card would be a location. I happen to be in the countryside at daytime. There are no restrictions to where I can go. So for turn 1, I'm going to start. I will arrive at the Taco Bellevue Hospital in New York. So, if you look at the card, you can see the name of it, its attributes, it's in a city, and it's a sanitarium. Cards play off of these keywords. This is a game of keywords. It's a unique location. You can only have one in your deck. That's what the red dot means. There is no gate here. If there was, you would see it here. It is a location. It's one of the 8 different types of cards. Matter of fact, we'll just pause real quick. The 8 different types of cards. Location, monster, adventure, event, ally, spell, tome, artifact. And there you go. I didn't count, but that's the end of the examples, so it must be 8. It is in the green region, which is known as Lovecraft Country. So I must continue traveling to locations in Lovecraft Country, the green region, unless I can play cards that allow me to switch regions. Tramp Steamer, for example, will let me go to Europe, which is purple. So I can then go to purple locations unless I fly back in an airplane, which can allow me to come back to here, or, you get the idea. There are several different regions in the game, including what are called exotic locations, which we will briefly touch on later. So, I've arrived at the Taco Bellevue Hospital. It happens to be a location where water is nearby, and it's indoors. I immediately gain 5 sanity. How about that? So we'll bump that up to 10, bump this up to 10. Now I have a maximum of 20 sanity. Now you follow the rules. Gain 5 sanity now, but you must spend the next turn in hydrotherapy, which means you play no cards and you do not pass. During each additional turn that you remain here, you may bury 1 phobia that is affecting your investigator. Phobia is an event card that you can play on your enemies. There are also Philia cards, which you generally play on yourself. We're not going to get into those. They are very specific types of events, but basically it's if I was to play a phobia on an opposing player as my turn, I would place that card, tell them what it does, and they must deal with those effects until they do something to bury that phobia. So, the sub-region of Lovecraft Country is New York. So, traveling through Lovecraft Country takes a little bit of time, but it's not impossible. Traveling specifically throughout New York is easier, which we can get into later. So, this was my turn. I played the card, I gained 5 sanity. The opponent then goes, takes their turn. That would be you. Then it's my turn again, but because of the effects of the card, I am now currently in hydrotherapy. So I've officially lost my second turn. So play goes on to the next player. He plays a card, right? Now it's back to me. So turn 3, I get to go again. Since I'm done here, and it's City Sanitarium, there's not much. I don't have any allies from New York. Oh, wait, I lied. This is a city location. So I can discover or run into Raymond LeGrasse, which I play on my ally side. This, by the way, is my story deck. As I change locations, as I play events, when stuff is done, this will slowly increase. Once I have enough cards around my investigator or in this deck, I can play an adventure. The top card of your story deck remains, but everything else gets shuffled back into your Mythos deck. Mythos deck, story deck. You are literally telling a story with these cards. Okay? So, I'm in a city location, which is in the green subregion, and that's the requirement here. Any city. Boom. Raymond LeGrasse, 3-point ally. He's steadfast. He's a police detective. He knows English and French, none of which will benefit me except for the steadfast part. You may recall the adventure, stand against the order, you need 2 steadfast allies. Boom, there's one of them. I have protection from a police investigation. That's a very specific event card. I'm not going to get into all the minutiae of the special abilities that cards have. Go look through your cards. These sections will tell you the pros and cons of any particular person. And you will find that they have repeating motifs. Many of them can know a spell. Many of them can protect you against this or that. So, moving forward. So that was my, turns 1, 2, 3. The other opponent goes. Turn 4. It is now time to move. You know, I'm going to play the Innsmouth Look. It is an event. There are no requirements as to how I play it. It tells you what it affects when you look at an event. Affects opponent's ally in this case. Then you basically read the stats. You will see down in the bottom corner that some events have a positive or minus sanity token, just like the Taco Bellevue Hospital. If it's red, that means you lose sanity when you play it. If it's green, you gain sanity when you play it, up to your maximum. Same thing with allies. Some allies are better to be around than others. Some make you feel better, some make you feel worse. There is a third color, it's yellow. We will discuss that when we get to it. But green good, red bad, you pretty much understand. So I will play this event. It will affect the opponent's ally. They randomly choose one. This is basically what's on the card. They randomly choose an adventure or an ally, and they turn into a fish. That fish goes into the Mythos threat. So let's pretend this was played on me, just for the sake of example. And how you play, you say, all right, playing the Innsmouth Look. Ally functions as a lesser independent monster now. Boom, he turned into a fish man. He is now a threat. And that's where he goes, right into the threat phase, which is handled once everybody passes to end the round. Once your event is played, successfully or not, it generally goes into the bottom of the story deck, like so. Alright? You may recall we needed to play the Innsmouth Look to complete your stand against the order. So that was my turn. Now the enemy has an opposing threat, which can hurt my sanity at the end of the round. He plays, we'll go ahead and travel. Travel is the way you get around without event cards. I'm going to travel to the Marsh Refining Company. When you are traveling, you place the card like so, which, as a matter of fact, this turns face down because you're no longer at the hospital. That is your turn. I'm able to go here because it's also green in the Lovecraft Country region. If it was in another color, I would not be able to travel there without a special ability. That is the turn for traveling. The next turn, so the opponent goes, now comes back to me, you have now arrived at Marsh Refining Company. This is when the effects take place, if there are any. It's a city, it's a business, you can find a tome here. There is a gate, you can summon a monster into your Mythos threat. It's now in the town of Innsmouth. You are no longer in New York, but you're still in Lovecraft Country. Water location, indoors, the special ability, all marshes, which are people, anybody with the name Marsh, are at +1 strength, which, by the way, I didn't cover with your ally. The strength of the ally is its combat value. They are generally used to defend you against the Mythos threat. We'll get into more of that later. So if I had a Marsh, it would be a strength 4. If this was a Marsh, I should say. So, on a following turn, I'm going to go ahead and use the gate. Here's how you use gates. The card now goes upside down to indicate that the gate was used. You can only use a gate in any location once. Again, unless there are special abilities. So, by using the gate, I summon a creature to my Mythos threat. The creature is played face down. My opponent does not know what it is. You know what it is, though, because once you play it, you have to use its sanity cost. So it costs me 2 sanity, I don't know if you can see that, to play this creature. So now I'm down to 18. It is a Shoggoth. It's a strength 6, which is crazy high. It's called it's a lesser servitor. There are greater servitors, lesser servitors, greater independence, lesser independence, and a couple other options. Those can be affected when cards say affects lesser servitors, right? So, once again, a game of keywords. It costs 2 sanity to put into my threat. This one's special ability. Add 2 points to the value of this card if your opponent in his threat, so you'll only find out during the combat phase, has Elder Things. Incidentally, this thing joins Deep Ones, Father Dagon, and Mother Hydra. What that means is you can generally only play 1 creature at a time with 1 gate, unless you can join. So let's pretend, just for a minute, that I had a Deep One in my hand. Because this joins Deep Ones, instead of turning this upside down to play 1 card, I can turn it upside down to play 2. Boom. They are considered 1 threat, so they're a single stack. If I were to have multiple gate uses in a turn, each time I use a gate, it's a different threat, right? So if I do this on turn 1, boom, a 2 creature threat. But down the road I get another 1 card, but I only have 1 because I can't join, boom, that is a second threat of 1, okay? Incidentally, another way that this could have gone out, I could have played this as 1 threat, and then coming down the road, finding another location with a gate, turning it upside down as my turn to summon a second threat. That we can explain later during the combat phase. So this is what my board looks like at the moment, when somebody's after me. So that was the turn. I took the sanity hit. He knows that it's big because it costs 2 sanity. But that's about all he knows. Next turn. Since I'm in a tome location, I'm going to play a tome. This is the Cathat Aquadingan. It's a strength 3 tome, which means you can have 3 spells on this tome. It's going to cost me 2 sanity immediately. Now I can only play the tome, A, if you're at a location that says tome, B, you need to know the language of the tome. Hey, guess what? My guy speaks German. This is a German tome. It's easy peasy. But let's pretend I knew not German. Pick any language, it doesn't matter. If I don't know German, all's not lost. As long as one of my allies knows German, he can help me discover the secrets of the tome at this location. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Legrasse knows French and English, so he's no help. But if I happened to have, do I have in my hand? Captain Karl Heinrich, who, by the way, as you can see, he's a European in Europe. I can't, with the hand I have, I cannot actually play him this turn. So he's basically dead weight. But if I were able to have him on the table right now, he knows German. So he would be able to decipher the tome's secrets. But I don't have him, so we'll just have to deal with it. Okay? So anyway, I know German, I can play a tome. Cost me 2 sanity. Now, when you play a tome, you can also attach any spells to it that match its symbol. See, tomes have special abilities, just like all this stuff. These benefit Deep Ones, Father Dacon, Mother Hydra. You may notice a motif here. But the primary purpose you have them is to be able to cast spells. There are several different icons for spells. I think there's like 6 or 7. I'm not going to get into them. Suffice to say, though, the Wave of Oblivion is the wavy lines token, or its wavy lines symbol, and they all mean something. The X with a diamond is folk, the skull is death, the weird question marky triangle thing is the yellow sign. There's a water. Is this water? You know what? Wavy lines is water, now that I think about it. So anyway, my point is, you can only place spells on a tome if it has the symbol, and you can max out at 3 spells on this tome. You can only play the tome if you or an ally knows the language. Now, assuming I didn't know the language and my ally did, if he kicks the bucket, it's still fine. As long as I played this on a previous turn, I can still use it. I only needed that language at the time of the playment? We'll say that, of the card. So, my Wave of Oblivion is now attached. The yellow sanity. That means optional. You only pay this sanity when you cast the spell. Playing it on the tome does not cast the spell. I did not use any of its effects. Therefore, it didn't cost me anything at the moment. So let's move on to a later turn. So that turn I played a tome with a spell on it, cost me 2 sanity. My next turn, let's pretend I want to play Wave of Oblivion. So I'm going to pay the 2 sanity, look at the top card of my opponent's story deck and discard it. That's pretty good. That's this. Story deck. This is how people complete adventures. So take the top card of your opponent's story deck and discard it. It's gone. If the card revealed is not a location, bury it. So basically, if you ever manage to get rid of the facing up card of a story deck, you flip the next card. The top card has to be face up. So basically, I get knocked back to the Taco Bellevue Hospital. In this case, if it's not a location, bury it. Burying just goes back under the story deck. Whenever stuff gets buried, it goes into the story deck. So basically what they're saying, Wave of Oblivion just stops you from being in your current location. Spells, then, when they're in a tome, don't get exhausted. They go back. If you played the spell off of a player, or off of an ally, they tend to get buried. Actually, you know what? I think I lied. Spells do get exhausted. You can double check in the rulebook, because it will tell you. But whether it gets exhausted or not, if it's exhausted, that just means you can't use it again this turn unless you spend one of your or you can't spend it again this round unless on a later turn you say, as my turn, I'm going to refresh the spell. Right? So that's how you do spells. And the spells will tell you what it affects. Affects an opponent's investigator, affects the Mythos threat, affects opponent's ally, that sort of thing. Affects opponent's sanity. So that is spells and tomes in a nutshell. That's basically what they do other than to fulfill requirements of story decks. So moving on, a later turn, I've already done my tome. Let's go ahead. Oh, since I'm in Innsmouth, I'm going to play Abigail Winsmith Marsh. She's a 2-point ally. She's steadfast, so now I have my 2 steadfast allies requirement. She's a wife. I don't know any cards that benefit wives offhand. She knows English. She's got a special ability. If there are any other marshes in play, she's at +2, which is not the case. But she does get +1 currently by being at the, oops, that's upside down, Marsh Refining Company. So that's how you play allies, just as a matter of course. So next turn, I'm actually there's no benefit to me staying at the Marsh Refining Company, so I'm going to travel, because this is a city location in Innsmouth, and this is a city location in Innsmouth. I don't have to do the I'm traveling to this location and then the next turn I arrive. When you are traveling inside the same city, it's immediate. So boom, I immediately go to the Smuggler's Tunnels. Since it's a scary place, I'm now down to 13 sanity. Now you notice, depending on how you build your deck, with the cards in it, you can really start taking a toll on yourself. So that is something you're going to want to consider when you are building your deck, making sure that you have the ability to gain more sanity than you can cost yourself, because your enemy is out to get your sanity too. Right? So you you and your opponent are both against each other. So that's a turn, right? Now there's a gate here, so I could play another Mythos threat, which would go in a different pile, but for the purposes of the game, I don't have any, so I'm not going to worry about it. Like I said, this guy's basically dead weight. I don't have all the cards in my opening hand to play the Stand Against the Order, so I'm going to hang on to that. Playable cards, though, I still have 2, and they are incidentally both artifacts. Since I am in an artifact location, I will spend the time to do so. So, while in the Smuggler's Tunnels, Abigail Winthrop Marsh discovers dynamite.
Darkness never dies. It waits.
Artifacts come in 2 types. Some are called weapons, some are not. As with all cards, you do immediately handle the sanity gain or loss as soon as you play the card. The effects of weapons are to increase the strength of the ally. In this case, it's a +6 strength modifier to Abigail, who's now a strength 8. Many artifacts also have other special abilities, which is something that you're just going to want to watch out for. So that would be a turn, just like playing a tome would be a turn, or playing an ally. So on a later turn, still being at the Smuggler's Tunnels, I can play another artifact. In this case, it'll be the Sphere of Nath, giving me a sanity reduction of 2. Because it's not a weapon, it gets played on the same side as tomes and artifacts. The effect of these artifacts can be constant. For example, a diver's suit allows you to survive the effects of being underwater. In this case, this is an activatable artifact, so as my turn, just like casting a spell would be a turn, as my turn, I can use the ability of the Sphere of Nath. I'm not going to worry about that. If you ever use a Sphere of Nath, you'll know why you would want to use it or why you don't. Please keep in mind, this is a unique item, just like some characters, just like some locations, so I can only have one of this in my deck. You just want to keep an eye out for that. Okay, so what do you do when you either can't play any more cards, or for strategic reasons you choose not to? You or any opponent can, instead of playing a card or using the effect of a card or casting a spell, can pass. When you declare a pass, that's your turn. Then play goes to the next player. They may choose to pass or not. They could play a card. But what's important is when it gets back around to you again, If you choose to pass a second time in a row, that ends the round. Once the round has ended, you then take a look at your minimum and maximum hand size. In this case, I have a hand size of 2, my maximum is 5, and my minimum is 4. So I do not have to discard. Let's say, for some reason, I had 8 cards in my hand when the round ends. When the round ends, you would have to discard down to the maximum of your hand size, in this case 5. So I'd have to lose 3 cards to hit that. But I could choose, in order to draw more cards, because I draw up to 13 in this guy's case, I could choose to discard 1 extra to hit the minimum of 4, so I could draw 1 extra card here. That is totally up to the player. It all depends on the scenario and the odds that you need an extra card or not. I can't make that call for you, just multiple games would do so. But the round actually hasn't ended. Once there are 2 passes, though we do worry about discarding, that happens later, you go to the Mythos threat phase. So now we find ourselves pitched against the forces of chaos and outer unintelligible evil that is the dark horror of the Lovecraftian universe, the Mythos phase. So, one player has passed 2 times consecutively. Doesn't matter that if there's a 3-player game, player 1 chooses to pass, player 2 chooses to pass, player 3 plays a card, but even though there were 2 passes listed, it wasn't the same player passing twice. That's key. The same player must pass 2 times, or in the event of the card called Unexpected Calamity, that's the only time that less than 2 consecutive passes by one player ends a round. So, the Mythos phase. This is how it works because it can get complicated. Okay? So, this is how your board looks at the start of the Mythos phase. The first thing that happens is you go around in order. I would assume by the lowest sanity, just like how turns are decided. That player declares which threat goes where. In this case, I only have 1 card in 1 threat. But like I said before, it's possible to have multiple threats depending on how many gates I used. In this case, it's just the 1. And for the purposes of the discussion, there's only 1 other player in this game, as I said before. So if it were a 3-player game, player 1 would point a threat somewhere and then potentially a second threat elsewhere. That's not the case though, so it's just going straight to the opponent. Okay? Now, then the opponent, assuming they have the higher sanity value, will declare where his threats go. In this case, because it's a 2-player game, they will decide that their 2 threats will go straight to the to you, actually. So you'll have to defend yourself. Once all the threats have been declared, now comes the round where everybody can in turn order, just like the declaring of threats. You can decide which of your people will defend. In this case, I will decide to have Abigail Winthrop Marsh be a defender. Raymond LaGrasse, for some reason, is too important for the sake of the... Actually, matter of fact, let's skip that. Raymond is expendable, so he will rise and meet the threat and defend. And she's going to hang back, even though she's got dynamite. I know it doesn't make sense, but we'll just go with it. So he's going to defend. She's just going to stay by my side. She will not be involved in combat. The opponent, in this case, will decide to use his souped up old man Watley, who happens to have a shotgun, which gives him +2 strength. And because of his special ability, he can know any one spell. He happens to have the Vula ritual. Okay? So, he has been committed to defend the honor of your opponent, who will just say, for the sake of argument, has 10 sanity as well. So, now that we've declared defenders, the next cycle, does anybody wish to cast any spells or use any artifacts? So, as all the other orders have been decided, does this guy wish to do you wish to cast a spell? Well, this doesn't really help you in combat, but you can choose to use it because it's the spell's declaration phase. We're just gonna not, and the Sphere of Nath doesn't help either, so this player is not going to declare any benefits. Your opponent, however, will use the Vula Ritual. So the Vula Ritual says this: summon or control a greater servitor. Okay? So he's casting the spell, and the spell gets buried once it's done, because that's how it works when it's attached to allies. The ally will tell you that, so you don't have to know that offhand. So I've thrown that into the ring. Okay? Now, as you can see, I don't know if it's going to do any good, because we don't know if this is a greater or lesser servitor or not. That's the thing about spells. You don't know if they're going to work ahead of time, unless you know they're going to work ahead of time. But because it was not cast by the player, he doesn't take a sanity hit. But if it was on a tome, he would. Just keep that in mind. Also, there's a typo on this card. This is supposed to be yellow. This is like one of the couple of misprints in all of the Mythos sets, just as a heads up. So anyway, so this has been cast. Now, does this guy want to do anything in response? No, because you do it one at a time, just like everything else. Does this guy want to do anything else? No. So now that everybody's out of tricks, we then reveal the identities of the threat. Well, snap. That's a lesser servitor. This summons or controls a greater servitor. So because this is lesser, this spell has no effect. So it gets buried in the opponent's deck. But that was a close call, because if you do summon or control, and this would be control in this case, he would switch sides, and then all three of these would go after you. So spells can be key, but they are risky. So anyway, it goes off without a hitch. Now we have what's called the Cosmic Battle, which I guess I can do it in this. Does it look good? No, it doesn't. I'm going to briefly rearrange everything to make life look a little easier for everyone.
Okay, so if you line up combat in rows, it makes more sense. I would actually put the sanity here, but that's a little difficult to see. You know what, screw it, we're just going to leave it that way. So, once we've committed our allies, once we've pulled off any spells or artifacts or any other bonuses we wanted to add to combat, it's down to just combat. So it looks like this. First is the Cosmic Battle. This is where the beings of the mythos duke it out with each other, and then whoever the victor is will then bleed over into the real world, leaving your allies to defend you before finally succumbing to, I guess, the loss of sanity in dealing with such creatures. And if the threat is so strong that even your defenders go down, then you're the one who takes the sanity hit. So, Dark Young has some special abilities, but none of them affect this particular combat because I've checked ahead of time. Shoggoth doesn't have any special abilities that affect his strength. He's a strength 6, Dark Young's a strength 4. Son of Yog-Sothoth is also a strength 4. However, he does have a key ability. He is invisible. It doesn't make him stronger, but we will get into that a little later. So, here's how a Cosmic Battle works. I tell my opponent that my total threat strength is 6. My opponent tells me his total threat strength is 8. Why? Because that's the numbers we got in the corner. So, Then you, at the same time, decide how to absorb the damage. Shoggoth can take 6 damage, and since he's the only member of this combat, there's nobody else to choose. So he takes 6 of the 8 total damage. Now his 6 damage, the opponent decides which of the 2 creatures get hit first. He decides it's the Dark Young. The Dark Young takes 4 of the 6 damage. He's dead. The other 2 damage goes to the son of Yog-Sothoth. Not enough to kill him. Since 6 of the total 8 damage has been absorbed, he still has 2 possible damage to deal. So we will remove the dead, and the combat continues. Fortunately, Old Man Watley and his shotgun are safe, so this player is no longer involved. So, son of Yog-Sothoth goes to deal with Raymond Legrasse. So, what normally happens is the 2 damage from Yog-Sothoth go into Raymond. Raymond deals 3 damage to Yog-Sothoth. Since he's only a strength 2 at the moment, he would definitely be dead. Legrasse takes 2, and even though his strength is 3, it's fatal. If he takes 1 damage, he's done, right? Now there's a couple of cards, such as Bulletproof Vest, that will allow him to, unless he takes the full brunt of the damage, all 3 of his hit points, that's when he can survive. So if he had a vest, he'd still be alive. But in a basic example, he would be dead even though he took 2 of the 3. But remember, I said he's invisible. Though all the creatures of the Mythos can see each other, no problem, Raymond cannot. The only way Raymond can see an invisible creature is if he either A, has what's called an enchanted weapon, which is an artifact weapon that he can equip, that says, hey, guess what? You can see invisible creatures. I think Mist Projector is a common one. So anyway, he doesn't have that. And he has no other artifacts that allow invisible creatures to be seen, such as the Ultraviolet. So unfortunately, Raymond can't help you. So he safely ducks out of this combat. And Yog-Sothoth, being invisible, goes straight to your sanity. Now he's only a strength 2, so that means your 10 sanity drops to an 8 for this particular example. Once that's over, all the buried dead, whether that be allies or creatures, they all go into everybody's story decks. Lots of stories require that you encounter a monster, and guess what? There are now monsters in everybody's story deck to count.
Okay, so now round 1 is successfully ended. And all the cards have been dropped into the story deck as appropriate. This is when you would choose to discard down to your maximum or minimum. The reason why you wait till the very end, even though I talked about it earlier, is there's a chance that some of your cards could have been played during combat or before the combat phase. So that's all done. So we will start round 2. Draw your hand back up to 13 or whatever your maximum hand size is. In my case, I've only got 2 cards, so I'm going to draw 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. And we will take a look at my hand. If you'll recall from our previous example, we've randomly decided that our opponent has 10 sanity. So because you have the lowest sanity, you're going to go first. And oh look, we've got a whole bunch of cool cards. Now, I'm not going to continue going through turns because once you've gone through one turn, you're going to go through each turn identically. The only difference being, we'll say during the course of round 2, being in Innsmouth, you can play an ally. Being in Innsmouth, you can travel from city to city because you are in Innsmouth in Lovecraft Country, and this is another city location. Let's pretend you even did that a second time, right? So, having done those things, turns out you now can play Stand Against the Order. So as a turn, you will say, hey, guess what? I've completed Stand Against the Order. And what you will do is take your story deck, flip it over, and start going through the list. So 2 steadfast allies run into 2 of the 3 marshes. Oh, damn. And this is what happens when you play Mythos. Sometimes you forget some of your requirements. Damn. Well, for the sake of discussion, we will just pretend that we ran into Jeremiah Brewster. Nope, sorry. We ran into Barnabas Marsh. Right? Because they're all Innsmouth folk, so they're easy to find in this place. So, your steadfast allies run into those 2 cowboys. You then, having gone through the Marsh Mansion, which was one of those cards I quickly and loosely played, and then the Refinery, which we were definitely at before. Marsh Refinery, blah, 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 blah. Dynamite, hey, guess what? There's our Dynamite, the Esoteric Order of Dagon. So you've completely and successfully banked 9 points. You gain 4 sanity as per the card, taking your 8 up to 12, even though it cost you 2, 3 sanity. Yeah, 3 sanity just to get there. But we're not going to worry about that now just because this is a tutorial and not a real game. The reason why I didn't commit, just for the sake of discussion, Abigail to the combat is when you use Dynamite, though it would have wrecked up the enemy. Actually, no, it wouldn't have, because Yog-Sothoth's son was invisible. But had I been able to use the Dynamite, you actually discard both the ally and Abigail. So they would, being discarded, wind up in your discard pile, which when this runs out, you pay a sanity and your discards get shuffled back into your deck. That's how you prevent from, when you lose your complete deck, that's just a rule. If you cannot draw up to your maximum hand size, you pay a sanity, all your discards get shuffled in, and then you can continue drawing. And if for whatever reason you can't possibly do that, guess what? The game's over because you lose. But anyway, so this is a turn or 2 of the card game Mythos. It's a little tedious because in many other card games you can do multiple things in a turn, but in this case each turn is actually just 1 card placement, whether it's placed sideways, flipped over because you're using it, added to another person. It's rare that you can play more than 1 card at a time, but when you can successfully do so, when you can empty your hand faster, you can control the tempo of the game and consternate your opponents who still have many more cards than you when you start passing and they go, oh snap, I only have 1 or 2 more turns before I have to start worrying about discarding.
Blake! Inheel. Kata'a. Lohath. Gorgamoth.
So there are other rules that I did not cover in this tutorial, such as the lobotomy. Feel free to consult your rulebook for any additional information about bypassing lobotomies and whatnot. But if you do have questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I do feel that I am an authority on the subject, so I can discuss rules with you and whatnot. So, thank you for listening. I am the Epidemic, and try not to go insane. Thank you.